History is not a simple story. It is, a complex tapestry woven with threads of triumph and threads of suffering. For a very long time, a significant part of this story, the story of women, was told in whispers, if it was told at all. We must look back, not with anger, but with understanding, to see the world as it was for our grandmothers and their grandmothers before them. Their lives were often framed by limitations that feel almost unimaginable to us today. They were born into a world that had already decided their worth, their roles, and their futures, long before they could even speak their own names. This was a world that did not see them as equals, but as something lesser, something to be managed and controlled. The truth is that for centuries, women were treated in a way that resembled servitude more than partnership. Their existence was defined by their relationship to men, first as a daughter to a father, then as a wife to a husband. They had very few legal rights of their own. A woman could not own property in many places. Anything she inherited or earned legally belonged to her husband. She could not sign contracts. She could not pursue higher education or enter most professions. Her world was small, deliberately kept small, by laws and customs designed to ensure she remained dependent. This lack of autonomy was not an accident. It was the very foundation of the social order. Laws were made by men, for men. This meant that the entire legal system was built to favor them. A woman who found herself in an unhappy or abusive marriage had almost no way out. Divorce was rare and scandalous, and it often left the woman with nothing. No money, no property, and sometimes not even her own children. The courts did not see her as an individual with rights, but as a part of her husband's household. If she dared to speak out against injustice, she was not seen as brave. Instead, she was labeled as difficult, hysterical, or disruptive. She was judged for having an opinion, for daring to want more than the limited life she was given. This system was reinforced not just by laws, but by powerful social expectations. From a very young age, girls were taught that their purpose was to be quiet, to be agreeable, and to be useful to others. They were educated differently from boys, learning skills for the home like sewing and cooking, rather than science, literature, or politics. They were told that their minds were not suited for complex thought, that their emotions made them unreliable. This constant messaging, from family, from church, from school, created a powerful internal cage. It made many women believe that this was the natural order of things, the way life was always meant to be. The home was often described as a woman's kingdom, her sacred domain, but for many, this kingdom was a gilded cage. While she was responsible for everything within its walls, she held very little real power. She was expected to manage the household, raise the children, cook the meals, and keep the home a peaceful sanctuary for her husband. This was an enormous amount of work, both physically and emotionally draining. Yet this labor was not seen as valuable. It was not considered work in the same way a man's job was. It was simply a woman's duty, an unpaid and often unacknowledged responsibility that consumed her entire life. The relationship between a husband and wife was rarely one of equals. Many men treated their wives not as partners to be cherished, but as possessions to be managed. A husband had the final say in all family decisions, from how money was spent to where the family would live. His comfort and his desires came first. A wife was expected to be obedient and to serve his needs without complaint. If he was unkind or cruel or unfaithful, she was often advised to be more patient, more forgiving, to try harder to be a good wife. Society protected the husband's authority, leaving the wife with little recourse or support. This lack of respect was deeply damaging. A woman could be intelligent, creative, and capable, but her talents were given no space to grow beyond the home. She might have brilliant ideas about the world, but no one would listen. She was the heart of the family, raising the next generation, yet her contribution was devalued. She had to care for her children, teaching them to be good people, but she herself was treated like a child, unable to make important decisions about her own life. This created a profound and silent struggle, a feeling of being essential and invisible at the same time. Girls grew up watching their mothers and other women live these restricted lives. They were taught that their value was tied to their beauty, their purity, and their ability to attract a husband. They were treated like objects to be admired and eventually passed from a father's ownership to a husband's. Their dreams and ambitions were often dismissed as silly or inappropriate. They were conditioned to be silent, to put the needs of the family and particularly the male members of the family before their own. This pressure to be selfless and quiet was immense, a heavy blanket that smothered their individuality. Why did so many women endure this unfairness without fighting back? The answer is complicated. It was not because they were weak or because they accepted their situation. Many women chose silence out of a deep sense of responsibility and love for their families. To speak out, to demand rights, was a tremendous risk. It could bring shame upon the family name. It could lead to a husband becoming angry or violent. A woman who caused trouble could be cast out, losing not only her home and financial security, but, most painfully, her children. The price of rebellion was simply too high for many to pay. The well-being of their children was often the primary reason women stayed in difficult situations. A mother would do anything to protect her children, to ensure they had a roof over their heads and food to eat. In a world where she had no ability to earn a living on her own, leaving a husband meant plunging her children into poverty and uncertainty. So she would swallow her pain, hide her tears, and endure the disrespect for their sake. She would sacrifice her own happiness to create a stable, if not happy, home for them. This was an act of immense quiet strength, a sacrifice that society demanded of them. Furthermore, women were isolated from one another. They were confined to their own private homes, with little opportunity to share their experiences and realize that their struggles were not unique. Without this sense of solidarity, it was easy to believe that one's unhappiness was a personal failing rather than the result of a deeply unjust system. The world outside the home was a man's world, and there were few places where women could gather and speak freely. This isolation was a powerful tool of control, as it prevented them from organizing and recognizing their collective power. They were made to feel alone in their silent battles. This culture of silence was passed down through generations. Mothers taught their daughters how to survive in this world. Be patient, be resilient, do not make waves. It was advice born of love and a desire to protect them from harm. They were teaching them the rules of a game that was rigged against them. To complain was seen as a sign of ungratefulness. You had a husband, a home, children. What more could you possibly want? The idea that a woman might want something for herself, like respect, freedom, or a voice, was seen as selfish and radical. The weight of this expectation was heavy, forcing their spirits into a smaller shape. But the human spirit cannot be silenced forever. Despite the risks, despite the isolation, a change began to stir. It started with a few brave women who dared to imagine a different world. They began to write, to speak, to question the so-called natural order of things. They started talking to one another, sharing their stories in secret at first, and then more openly. They discovered that their private pain was a shared political problem. This realization was the spark that lit a fire. They understood that they were not alone, and in that shared understanding, they found incredible strength and courage. These pioneers, the suffragettes and feminists, began to fight. They fought for the right to vote because they knew that without a voice in making the laws would never be fair. They chained themselves to railings, they went on hunger strikes, they marched in the streets, facing ridicule, arrest, and violence. They were called unfeminine and dangerous, but they persisted. They fought for the right to education, to own property, to have control over their own bodies and their own destinies. They wrote books and pamphlets, held meetings, and slowly, painstakingly, began to change minds. Their courage was a powerful force that began to dismantle the old structures of injustice. Every step forward was a battle. Gaining the right to vote was a monumental victory, but it was only the beginning. The fight continued in homes, in workplaces, and in the halls of power. Women started entering professions that had been closed to them, becoming doctors, lawyers, scientists, and leaders. They demanded equal pay for equal work. They fought for laws that would protect them from domestic violence and give them reproductive freedom. They challenged the old ideas of what a woman could and should be. The world we live in today, a world where women can vote, own property, pursue any career, and speak their minds, was built on the courage of these women. Their struggle is a reminder that freedom is never given, it is won. The journey is not over, as inequality still exists in many forms, but the story of their fight is a powerful and inspiring one. It teaches us that one person's voice can become a chorus, and that a chorus can become a roar so loud that it changes the course of history. They fought so that today, their daughters and granddaughters could live with the freedom and fairness they were once denied.